The summer of 1963 settled over our small Arkansas town like a heavy quilt, warm and stifling, the kind that made you long for a breeze that never came. I was 22, a young wife to Thomas and mother to our 6-month-old daughter, Ellie, but that June morning I was mostly Samuel's daughter, sitting by his bedside in the room where I'd grown up. The air smelled of liniment and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle drifting through the cracked window. Daddy's chest rose and fell, each breath a labored rasp, like wind rattling through dry leaves. His lungs, scarred from years in the coal mines, were giving up, and I felt my heart fraying with them. Our house was a modest clapboard, painted white but peeling at the edges, tucked at the end of a dirt road lined with blackberry bushes. It had been Mama's pride, her flower beds bursting with zinnias and marigolds, though I'd let them go wild since her passing 5 years ago. Daddy had been my anchor since then, his quiet strength filling the gaps Mama left. He'd taught me to fish in the creek behind our house, to bait a hook with steady hands, to listen for the whippoorwill's call at dusk. "Clara," he'd say, his voice low and warm, "the world's got its shadows, but you keep your eyes on the light." I clung to those words now, whispering them to myself as I held his hand, its calluses rough against my skin. Ellie slept in her crib across the room, her tiny chest fluttering with soft, even breaths. She was my miracle born just after Christmas, with Thomas's hazel eyes and a laugh that could melt the hardest heart. Thomas was at the lumber mill, working the early shift, his boots heavy on the porch when he'd left at dawn. He'd kissed my forehead, his lips warm and quick, and promised to be home by midnight. I'd nodded, too tired to speak, my eyes already fixed on Daddy's still form. The morning crawled by, the clock on the mantel ticking too loud, each second a reminder of time slipping away. I'd made coffee strong and black, the way Daddy liked it, though he hadn't touched a cup in weeks. The kitchen was a mess of dishes, casseroles from neighbors' half-eaten pies, a jar of pickles someone had brought. Grief brought food in our town, as if nourishment could fill the void. I didn't eat, my stomach knotted with dread. Instead, I sat by Daddy reading Psalms aloud, my voice trembling over the familiar words. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He didn't stir, but I hoped he heard, hoped it carried him somewhere peaceful. Around noon, the screen door creaked, and Roy stepped inside. Roy was Daddy's cousin, a big man in his 40s, broad-shouldered and loud, with a laugh that filled a room but never quite reached his eyes. He'd grown up with Daddy, the two of them running wild in these hills as boys, but where Daddy was steady, Roy was a storm. Unpredictable, quick to anger. He carried a bottle of whiskey in a paper bag, his boots tracking red dirt across Mama's clean floor. "Clara," he said, his voice booming, "thought I'd come toast Sam's life. He'd want that." I didn't like whiskey in the house, didn't like Roy's swagger or the way his eyes lingered on me, but Daddy's lips twitched in a faint smile, so I nodded. "Just a little," I said, my voice tight. Roy set the bottle on the kitchen table, its amber liquid catching the light. He poured himself a glass, the smell sharp and sour, and offered me one. I shook my head, my hands busy smoothing Daddy's blanket. Roy shrugged, downing his drink in one gulp, his throat working like a bellows. Neighbors came and went as the day wore on, their voices a low hum of sympathy. Miss Lila from down the road brought cornbread still warm, her hands trembling as she hugged me. Preacher John stopped by, his Bible worn at the edges, praying over Daddy in a voice that rumbled like thunder. I thanked them all, my smile brittle, my heart aching for the quiet of just me and Daddy. Roy stayed, though, sprawled in the armchair by the window, his boots propped on a stool. He talked too loud, reminiscing about fishing trips with Daddy, his stories laced with half-truths. I nodded, barely listening, my eyes on Daddy's face, willing him to open his eyes. By afternoon, the heat was oppressive, the air thick with the scent of pine and dust. I opened the windows wider, hoping for a breeze, but the world outside was still, the cicadas drone a constant hum. Ellie woke, her cries sharp and insistent. I lifted her from the crib, her warmth grounding me, and fed her a bottle, rocking her in the chair by Daddy's bed. Roy watched, his gaze heavy, and I shifted Ellie to shield myself from his stare. "She's a pretty little thing," he said, his voice too soft, too close. I murmured a thanks, my skin prickling. As evening fell, the light turned golden, painting the room in hues of amber and shadow. Daddy's breathing grew slower, each pause longer, each inhale a battle. I held his hand tighter, my thumb tracing the veins that mapped his life. "I love you, Daddy," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You don't have to fight anymore." His fingers twitched, the faintest pressure, and I clung to it, a lifeline in the storm of grief. Roy was still there, his whiskey bottle half empty, his presence a weight I couldn't shake. He'd moved to the kitchen, talking to a neighbor who'd stopped by, his laugh grating against my nerves. I wanted him gone, wanted the house to be mine and Daddy's again, but I didn't know how to say it. Manners were a cage in our town, especially for women, and I was too young, too raw to break free. At 9:17 p.m. Daddy's chest stilled. The room went quiet, the ticking clock louder than ever. I waited, holding my breath, praying for one more rise, one more fall. But he was gone. The canyon of grief opened wide, swallowing me whole. I didn't cry, not yet. I sat there, his hand in mine, the warmth fading from his skin. Ellie slept unaware, and the house felt too big, too empty. Roy came back into the room, his steps heavy, his glass clinking against the bottle. "He's gone then," he said, not a question. I nodded, unable to speak. He stood too close, his shadow falling over me. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," he said, his voice low, almost kind. "Thomas won't be back for hours. I'll stay." I wanted to say no, to scream it, but the words stuck in my throat. Thomas wouldn't be home till midnight, and Ellie was asleep, her crib a small island of safety. The neighbors had gone, their casseroles cold on the counter. I was alone with my grief, with Roy, with the weight of a house that no longer felt like home. I nodded, numb, my eyes fixed on Daddy's still face. Roy settled back in the armchair, pouring another drink. His eyes followed me as I moved to cover Daddy with the quilt Mama had made. Its patches faded but soft. "You're strong, Clara," he said, but his tone was wrong, edged with something I couldn't name. "You'll need to be, now that Sam's gone." I didn't answer, my hands busy, my mind racing. The night stretched ahead, endless and dark, and I felt the first stirrings of fear, a cold thread weaving through my grief. Roy's presence was a storm cloud, gathering strength, and I was too lost to see the danger. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past 10 p.m. Each second a hammer against my skull. The house was too quiet now, Daddy's rasping breaths gone, leaving only the hum of cicadas outside and the faint creak of the floorboards settling. I stood at the sink, washing dishes I'd already scrubbed, the hot water scalding my hands but grounding me in its sting. The casseroles and pies from neighbors sat untouched on the counter, their smells, greasy chicken, sweet peaches, turning my stomach. Grief was a weight pressing me down, but I kept moving, afraid to stop, afraid to feel the full measure of Daddy's absence. Ellie slept in her crib in the bedroom, her tiny form a small light in the darkness. I'd checked on her minutes ago, brushing my fingers over her soft curls, her breath a steady rhythm that kept me tethered. She was 6 months old, too young to know her grandfather was gone, too young to sense the storm brewing in our home. I envied her peace, her unawareness. My own heart was a tangle of sorrow and something sharper, fear, though I couldn't yet name its source. Roy was still here, sprawled at the kitchen table, his whiskey glass sweating onto Mama's embroidered tablecloth. The bottle he brought to toast Sam's life was nearly half empty, its amber liquid glinting in the dim light of the single bulb overhead. His boots, caked with red Arkansas dirt, rested on the floor too close to my bare feet. I kept my eyes on the sink, on the suds swirling down the drain, but I felt his gaze, heavy and unyielding, like a hand pressing against my spine. "You ought to sit, Clara," he said, his voice thick with drink, slurring at the edges. "You're gonna wear yourself out, running around like that." I didn't look at him, didn't answer. I rinsed a plate, my hands trembling, and set it on the rack. The air felt wrong, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. I wanted Thomas home, his quiet strength to fill the space Roy occupied. But the mill kept him till midnight, and the clock mocked me with its slow march. Roy shifted, his chair creaking, and poured another drink. The clink of the bottle against the glass was too loud, a sound that cut through the haze in my head. "Sam was proud of you, you know," he said, his tone softer now, almost kind. "Said you were tougher than you looked. But you don't look so tough tonight." His laugh was low, jagged, and it sent a shiver through me. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles white, and murmured something about needing to check on Ellie. I moved toward the bedroom, my bare feet cold on the hardwood, but Roy stood, blocking the doorway. He was a big man over 6 feet, his shoulders broad from years hauling timber. His flannel shirt smelled of sweat and whiskey, and his eyes, bloodshot and narrow, pinned me in place. "Don't run off," he said, stepping closer. "We're just talkin'." His hand grazed my arm, his fingers rough, and I flinched, stepping back. "Don't," I said, my voice barely a whisper, swallowed by the pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but my body felt small, fragile, like the girl I'd been before Ellie, before marriage, before Daddy's illness stole my strength. Roy didn't move, his smile curling like smoke. "You're too pretty to be so sad, Clara," he said, his voice a mockery of comfort. "Sam's gone. You gotta let loose sometime." I tried to sidestep him, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door, on Ellie's crib beyond it. But he moved with me, his bulk filling the space, his breath hot and sour. "Roy, please," I said, louder now, my voice shaking. "I need to rest. You should go." He laughed again, a sound that curdled my blood and grabbed my wrist. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into my skin. "You don't tell me what to do," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Not tonight." What followed was a blur of pain and terror, a storm that tore through me and left me broken. I fought, my hands pushing against his chest, my nails clawing at his arms, but he was stronger, his rage a force I couldn't match. The kitchen table scraped across the floor, dishes clattering, and my arm hit its edge, a sharp pain blooming as blood welled from a gash. My lips split, the coppery taste filling my mouth. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the house, by the night, by my own fear. Roy's words were a snarl, accusing me of things I hadn't done, blaming me for Daddy's death, for being too soft, for existing. When he finally stepped back, his breath ragged, he muttered something about me asking for it, and stumbled to the door. The screen slammed behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I lay on the floor, my dress torn, my body a map of bruises and blood. The kitchen was a wreck, spilled whiskey, a broken plate, Mama's tablecloth stained. I couldn't move, couldn't think, my mind a storm of shame, disbelief, and grief. Daddy was gone, and now this Roy's betrayal, a wound deeper than the cuts on my skin. Ellie's cry pierced the silence, sharp and desperate. It was the only thing that pulled me back, that forced my limbs to move. I crawled to the bedroom, my hands shaking as I lifted her from the crib. Her warmth, her weight, grounded me. I held her close, my tears falling onto her soft hair, and sobbed for the first time since Daddy's death. The sound was raw, animal, a release of everything I'd held inside. I rocked her, whispering her name, her tiny hands clutching my dress as if she knew I needed her. I don't know how long I sat there, the clock ticking, the night pressing against the windows. I cleaned myself up, my movements mechanical, washing the blood from my arm and face, hiding the torn dress in the bottom of the laundry basket. The gash on my arm stung, but I bandaged it with a rag, my hand steady despite the tremor in my soul. I changed into a clean dress, one of Mama's old ones, its soft cotton a small comfort. I couldn't let Thomas see me like this, couldn't let him know what Roy had done. The shame was a weight I didn't understand, a voice whispering that I'd failed, that I'd invited this somehow. When Thomas came home, his boots heavy on the porch, I was sitting in the dark, Ellie asleep in my arms. He knelt beside me, his eyes soft with worry. "Clara, what happened?" he asked, his hand brushing my cheek. I flinched and his brow furrowed. "I fell," I lied, my voice flat. "I'm just tired. Daddy's gone." He believed me, his trust a knife in my chest. He held me, his arms gentle, and I let him, though my body felt like a stranger's. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay beside Thomas, listening to his steady breathing, my mind replaying every moment. Roy's hands, his words, the way the kitchen light flickered as he loomed over me. I wondered if I'd invited his cruelty, if my grief had made me weak, if Daddy's death had broken some part of me that couldn't be fixed. The house felt tainted, its walls holding secrets I couldn't speak. Outside, the cicadas sang, oblivious, and I envied their indifference. The days after Daddy's death blurred into a haze, each one a step through quicksand. The sun rose and set over our small Arkansas town, its light filtering through the pines, but it felt dim, as if the world had lost its color. I was 22, a mother to Ellie, a wife to Thomas, but inside I was a stranger, carrying a secret that burned like a coal in my chest. Roy's assault had left me bruised, not just in body but in soul, and I wore a mask of endurance to hide the cracks. The house, once a haven, felt like a cage, its walls holding the echo of that night. Morning routines kept me upright. I'd rise before dawn, the air cool and heavy with dew, and start the coffee, its bitter scent grounding me. Ellie woke early, her cries sharp but familiar, a call to action. I'd lift her from her crib, her warmth a lifeline, and feed her oatmeal, her tiny hands grabbing at the spoon. Her giggles, bright and unburdened, were a balm, though they couldn't reach the deepest wounds. I'd dress her in the little smocks I'd sewn, their stitches uneven but made with love, and sing softly, Amazing Grace, Daddy's favorite, my voice cracking on the high notes. Thomas noticed the change in me. He'd come home from the lumber mill, his flannel shirt smelling of sawdust, and try to pull me close, his hands gentle but heavy with expectation. I'd flinch, my body betraying me, and he'd pause, his hazel eyes searching mine. Clara, you're not yourself, he'd say, his voice soft but edged with worry. I'd smile, a thin, practiced thing, and blame Daddy's death. Just grieving, I'd murmur, turning away to stir the stew or fold laundry. He'd nod, accepting it, but the space between us grew. A quiet rift I didn't know how to bridge. The town was small, its pulse carried by gossip and church bells. Daddy's funeral came 3 days after his passing, a blur of hymns and casseroles. The church was packed, the air thick with the scent of lilies and sweat. I stood by Thomas, Ellie in my arms, her weight anchoring me as Preacher John spoke of eternal rest. Roy was there, standing with his wife, Helen, his face a mask of solemnity. His eyes met mine once, a fleeting glance that sent a shiver through me. I looked away, focusing on the hymn book, my fingers trembling as I turned the pages. He was family, a fixture in our world, and that truth twisted the knife deeper. I avoided Roy after that, skipping the men's Bible study where he lingered, dodging the general store when I knew he'd be there. But his presence was a shadow, inescapable. I'd see his truck, rusted and red, parked at the diner, or hear his booming laugh at church socials. Each time my heart raced, my breath shallow, as if he could reach me across the distance. I prayed he'd stay away, prayed God would shield me, but my faith felt fragile, a cracked vessel leaking doubt. The community noticed my quietness. Miss Lila, our neighbor, stopped by with a basket of green beans, her eyes soft with pity. You're too thin, Clara, she said, her hands patting mine. Grief'll do that, but you gotta eat. I nodded, forcing a smile, and said I was managing. At church, the women's circle clucked over me, their voices a mix of kindness and curiosity. Samuel was a good man, they'd say, squeezing my arm. You'll find your strength. I wanted to scream that strength was a lie, that I was breaking inside, but I stayed silent, the weight of their expectations heavier than my own. Ellie was my refuge. At 6 months she was starting to babble, her sounds a music that cut through the fog. I'd sit on the porch with her, the evening air cool against my skin, and point out the fireflies, their glow a fleeting magic. See that, Ellie girl? I'd whisper, her head nestled against my chest. That's hope, blinking in the dark. She'd coo, her tiny hand grabbing my finger, and for a moment I could breathe. But alone in the quiet of night, the memories returned, Roy's hands, his voice, the blood on my arm. I'd wake gasping, my heart pounding, Thomas sleeping soundly beside me. One Sunday, Roy came to our house uninvited. Thomas was home, thank God, splitting wood in the yard. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for biscuits when the screen door creaked. Roy stood there, holding a pie from Helen, his smile too wide. Thought you could use some sweetness, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. My hands froze, flour dusting the counter like snow. Thomas came in, wiping sweat from his brow, and greeted Roy warmly, oblivious to the tension. I served coffee, my movements mechanical, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. Roy stayed too long, his laughter filling the house, each word a taunt. When he left, I sagged against the counter, my breath ragged, the pie untouched. Shame was my constant companion. I felt marked, as if everyone could see what Roy had done, as if my silence branded me guilty. I stopped looking in mirrors, afraid of the woman I'd find, her hollow eyes, her bruised spirit. I scrubbed the kitchen floor daily, trying to erase the memory of that night, but the stains remained, invisible but real. I wondered if I'd invited Roy's cruelty, if my grief had made me weak, if I'd failed Daddy by letting this happen under his roof. Church was both solace and trial. I'd sit in the pew, Ellie on my lap, and listen to Preacher John's sermons about forgiveness, about God's plan. I wanted to believe, but my prayers were questions, sharp and unanswered. Why had God let Daddy die? Why had Roy been there, his cruelty a second loss? I'd clutch my Bible, its pages worn from Daddy's hands, and search for answers, but none came. Yet I sang the hymns, my voice blending with the congregation because it was expected, because it was all I knew. Thomas tried to reach me. One evening as we sat on the porch, the sky streaked with pink, he took my hand. "Clara, talk to me," he said, his voice low. "I know it's more than your daddy." I wanted to tell him, to spill the truth and let it burn away the shame, but fear stopped me. Roy was family, tied to us by blood and town. What would Thomas do? Fight him? Shame us all? I couldn't risk it, couldn't bear the thought of our life unraveling further. "I'm just tired," I said, pulling my hand away. He sighed, his shoulders slumping, and I hated myself for the distance I'd built. Ellie grew, her milestones a quiet joy. She started crawling, her chubby hands slapping the floor, and I'd laugh despite myself, chasing her across the living room. I'd tell her stories about Daddy, how he'd carved her cradle, how he'd sung to her when she was a newborn. "Your grandpa loved you," I'd say, my throat tight. "He's watching over you now." I didn't know if I believed it, but I needed her to carry his light. The town moved on as towns do. The casseroles stopped coming, the condolences faded. I kept up appearances, baking for church suppers, nodding at neighbors' greetings. But inside I was a storm, grief and shame swirling together. I'd lie awake at night, Thomas's steady breathing beside me, and replay that night with Roy, searching for a moment I could have changed. I found none, but the question haunted me, a ghost I couldn't banish. By late summer I was a shadow of myself, thinner, quieter, my smiles a performance. I clung to routine, washing diapers, tending the garden, praying with Ellie at bedtime. But the mask was heavy, and I wondered how long I could wear it before it cracked, before the truth spilled out and changed everything. By the summer of 1964, I was a tightly coiled spring, ready to snap under the weight of secrets and grief. The Arkansas heat pressed against our small clapboard house, the air thick with the scent of pine and dust. I was 23, a mother to Ellie, now a toddling 1-year-old, and a wife to Thomas, whose patience was fraying as my silence grew. Daddy had been gone for over a year, but his absence was a raw wound, made sharper by what Roy had done that night. The shame clung to me like damp cotton, heavy and suffocating, and I lived in fear of Roy's shadow, his presence a constant threat in our small town. Mornings began with routine, my shield against collapse. I'd rise at dawn, the sky pale pink through the kitchen window, and start the coffee, its bitter steam a small comfort. Ellie woke with a babble, her hazel eyes bright with curiosity, and I'd lift her from her crib, her warmth easing the ache in my chest. I'd feed her oatmeal, wiping her chubby cheeks as she grinned, her laughter alight in the darkness. But even Ellie couldn't reach the deepest parts of me, where Roy's hands and words lingered, a poison I couldn't purge. Thomas worked long hours at the lumber mill, his boots heavy on the porch when he left at sunrise. He'd kiss my forehead, his lips warm but quick, and I'd force a smile, hiding the flinch that came with any touch. He'd noticed my distance, my jumpiness, and his questions grew sharper. "Clara, you're fading away," he said one morning, his hands on my shoulders, his eyes searching mine. "It's more than your daddy, isn't it?" I shook my head, murmuring about grief, but the lie tasted bitter. I wanted to tell him about Roy, to let the truth spill out, but fear stopped me. Fear of what Thomas might do, of what the town would say, of how Roy's family ties could unravel our life. The town moved on, its rhythm unbroken by my private storm. Church was a weekly trial, the pews filled with familiar faces, their smiles kind but probing. Roy was there every Sunday, standing with his wife, Helen, his loud laugh cutting through the hymns. I'd clutch Ellie tighter, my heart racing, and keep my eyes on the preacher, his sermons about forgiveness a knife in my gut. I prayed for strength, for silence, for Roy to disappear, but God seemed distant, his answers lost in the haze of my doubt. I avoided Roy's haunts, the diner, the feed store, but our town was too small to escape him entirely. I'd see his rusted red truck parked on Main Street, or catch his voice at a church social, and my breath would catch, my hands trembling. I started locking the doors, a new habit in a town where no one did. The click of the bolt a small rebellion against my fear. At night I'd check the windows, my fingers brushing the curtains, as if I could keep Roy out by sheer will. One afternoon in June, I saw Helen at the market, her basket heavy with apples and flour. She was kind, her eyes tired, her smile worn thin. "You're lookin' pale, Clara," she said, her hand brushing mine. "You need to rest." I nodded, my throat tight, wondering if she knew what her husband was, if she'd seen the darkness in him. Guilt gnawed at me for not speaking, but fear was stronger. Fear of her disbelief, of Roy's rage, of the town's judgment. I bought my groceries and hurried home, Ellie's hand in mine, her toddling steps a reminder to keep moving. The breaking point came in July, a hot, sticky day that clung to my skin. Thomas was in the yard hanging laundry, the sheets snapping in the breeze. Ellie napped inside, her crib a quiet sanctuary. I was washing dishes when the screen door creaked, and Roy stepped in uninvited, his boots tracking dirt across the floor. He was drunk, his eyes bloodshot, his smile a twisted thing. "Clara," he said, his voice slurred. "You're lookin' lonely." My heart stopped, my hands freezing in the soapy water. I glanced at the yard where Thomas's shadow moved, and prayed he'd come inside. "Get out," I said, my voice louder than I'd expected, sharp with a strength I didn't know I had. Roy laughed, stepping closer, his breath sour with whiskey. "You don't mean that," he said, his hand reaching for me. I stepped back, my hip hitting the counter, and raised a trembling hand. "Leave, Roy. Now." He paused, his eyes narrowing, but something in my voice, maybe the edge of desperation, made him hesitate. He muttered a curse, grabbed his hat, and stumbled out, the door slamming behind him. I sank to the floor, my breath ragged, my body shaking. Thomas came in, his brow furrowed. "Was that Roy?" he asked, his voice tight. I nodded, unable to speak, my hands clutching the dish towel like a lifeline. He knelt beside me, his callous fingers brushing my cheek. "Clara, what's wrong?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. The words I'd held back for a year rose like a tide, and I couldn't stop them. "He hurt me," I whispered, my voice breaking. "After Daddy died. Roy, he scared me, was cruel." I couldn't say the whole truth, couldn't name the assault, but it was enough. Thomas's face hardened, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with something I'd never seen. He stood, his hands clenched, and I grabbed his arm, panic rising. "Don't," I said. "Please, Thomas, don't make it worse." He looked at me, his anger softening into pain, and nodded, pulling me into his arms. For the first time in months, I didn't flinch. That evening, Thomas confronted Roy, not with fists but with words. He found him at the diner, the air thick with cigarette smoke, and told him to stay away from us. Roy denied everything, his voice loud, his laugh forced, but Thomas didn't waver. "You come near my family again and you'll regret it," he said, his tone steady, final. Roy scoffed, but he didn't argue, and for the first time I felt a flicker of safety, of strength. After that, I started to reclaim pieces of myself. I talked more to Thomas about small things at first, like Ellie's new words or the garden's tomatoes. I wrote letters to Daddy, pouring out my pain, my fear, my love for him, then burned them in the backyard, the smoke rising like a prayer. I joined a women's sewing group at church, their chatter a quiet comfort. They shared stories of loss, of survival. Not the same as mine, but close enough to resonate. I listened, my hands busy with needle and thread, and felt a spark of hope. Ellie was my anchor. She'd toddle after me, her laughter filling the house, and I'd scoop her up, spinning her until we both giggled. I'd tell her about Daddy, about his fishing trips, his gentle hands, wanting her to know him through me. "You're strong, Ellie girl," I'd say, kissing her forehead. "Don't ever let anyone take that from you." I was teaching myself as much as her, rebuilding the woman I'd been before Roy's betrayal. The town didn't change, but I did. I stopped jumping at every creek, stopped seeing Roy in every shadow. He kept his distance, his truck a rare sight, his laugh absent from church. I didn't know if Thomas's words had scared him or if he'd simply moved on, but I didn't care. I was learning to breathe again, to live with the scars, to see myself not as broken, but as enduring. The years after that terrible night in 1963 slipped by like water through my fingers, some moments clear, others blurred by time. By 1975 I was 34, a grandmother at last, with Ellie, now 16 and fierce as a summer storm, having her first child, a girl we named Sarah after Mama. Our small Arkansas town had faded into memory, replaced by a new life in a slightly larger town an hour away, where Thomas had taken a better job at a bigger lumber mill. The move in 1968 was a quiet salvation, putting distance between me and Roy, though his shadow lingered, a scar that ached in quiet moments. Our new home was a brick rancher with a wide porch, its paint fresh and its garden mine to shape. I planted roses, their thorns a reminder of beauty's sharp edges, and tended them with care, my hands steady in the soil. Ellie grew up running through that yard, her laughter chasing away the ghosts. Thomas and I grew closer, our marriage tempered by time and honesty, though I never told him the full truth of Roy's assault. Some secrets I decided were mine to carry, not because I didn't trust Thomas, but because speaking them felt like giving Roy power again. Instead, I shared pieces, my fear, my grief, and Thomas listened, his hands gentle, his silence a promise. Ellie was my light, always had been. At 16, she was a whirlwind. Tall like her father, with Daddy's bright eyes and a curiosity that could unravel the world. She'd sit at the kitchen table, her schoolbooks scattered, and ask about her grandfather. "Tell me about Grandpa Samuel," she'd say, her pencil pausing. I'd smile, my throat tight, and tell her how he'd carved her cradle, how he'd sung Amazing Grace to her as a baby, his voice rough but warm. "He loved you, Ellie girl," I'd say, my fingers brushing her hair. "He's watching over you, even now." I didn't know if I believed it, but I needed her to carry his love forward. I taught Ellie to trust her voice, to never let fear silence her. "You're stronger than you know," I'd tell her, watching her roll her eyes but smile. I didn't speak of Roy, didn't want his darkness touching her, but I watched her closely, teaching her to lock doors, to walk with purpose, to know her worth. When Sarah was born, Ellie's strength shone brighter. She'd cradle her daughter, her face soft with wonder, and I'd see myself at 22, holding Ellie, finding purpose in her tiny hands. Roy's life unraveled, as lives built on cruelty often do. Through cousins I heard whispers. Helen left him in 1970, tired of his drinking and temper. He lost his job at the sawmill, his truck repossessed, his name a cautionary tale. Part of me pitied him, a small Christian part that Daddy had nurtured, but pity didn't erase pain. I didn't seek revenge. Living well was enough. My garden bloomed, my home filled with Ellie's laughter and Sarah's coos, and I found joy in small things. A new recipe, a sunrise, the creak of the porch swing. By my 40s, in the early 1980s, life had settled into a rhythm. Thomas's hair grayed at the temples, his laugh lines deeper, and we'd sit together at night, sharing coffee in silence. Ellie married a kind man, a mechanic named Paul, and they had 2 more girls, Lily and Grace. I was a grandmother 3 times over, my heart swelling with each new face. I'd braid their hair, tell them stories of Samuel, how he'd catch fireflies in a jar, how he'd pray before every meal, his hands folded like a steeple. "Your great-grandpa was a good man," I'd say, their eyes wide. "He'd love to see you now." The pain of 1963 never vanished, but it changed, like a river carving a new path. I'd wake some nights, my heart racing, Roy's voice echoing in my dreams. But I'd light a lamp, read Psalms, and remind myself I'd survived. Faith, once cracked, had mended, not perfect but stronger for it. I joined a women's group at our new church, their stories of loss, of betrayal, of endurance, echoing mine in quiet ways. I didn't share my truth, not then, but I listened, their voices a thread pulling me back to myself. In my late 40s, I started writing again. As a girl, I'd scribbled poems in a notebook, hiding them under my mattress, but life, marriage, motherhood, grief had buried that spark. Now, with Ellie grown and the girls filling my days with chatter, I found a new notebook, its pages crisp and waiting. I wrote about Daddy, his hands rough from the mines, his smile bright as the sun. I wrote about Mama's garden, about Ellie's first steps, about the Arkansas hills that held us all. And in careful, veiled words, I wrote about a woman betrayed, her strength forged in silence. The words were a release, each one a brick in a new foundation. I joined a writing group at the library, a small circle of women with stories of their own. At first, I shared my work anonymously, slipping pages into the pile, my heart pounding as they read. "This is powerful," one woman said, her eyes kind. "Who wrote it?" I raised my hand, my cheeks warm, and they clapped, their voices lifting me. In 1985, I entered a story in a local contest. A tale of a woman surviving loss, her heart scarred but unbroken. It won second place, a small ribbon and a check for $20. Reading it aloud at the library, my voice steady, I felt Daddy's pride, as if he were there nodding. By my 60s, in the early 2000s, I was a grandmother in full gray-haired. My hands lined with age, my laugh louder than it used to be. Ellie's girls were teenagers, Sarah a dreamer like her mother, Lily sharp-witted, Grace quiet but fierce. We'd bake together, their hands sticky with dough, and I'd tell them stories, not just of Samuel but of resilience, of finding light in the dark. Life will test you, I'd say, stirring batter. But you're tougher than the toughest storms. They'd nod, half listening, but I saw the spark in their eyes, the same one I'd nurtured in Ellie. The house was a haven now, filled with photos, Ellie's wedding, the girls' birthdays, Thomas and me on our 30th anniversary. The garden thrived, roses climbing the fence, and I'd sit on the porch at dusk, a notebook in my lap, writing for myself, for my girls, for the woman I'd been. Roy was gone by then, dead of a heart attack in 1990, the news reaching me through a cousin's letter. I didn't mourn him, but I prayed for his soul, a final act of grace I offered for Daddy's sake. As I sit now, old and gray, my hands slower but my heart full, I know that grief and trauma don't vanish. They weave into your soul's story, threads of pain and strength. I'm Clara, grandmother, survivor, writer, a woman who carried her father's love and her own scars across decades. I look at Ellie, at Sarah, Lily, and Grace and see a legacy unbroken. I've built a life of love, of stories, each one a step toward healing, a testament to the light Daddy told me to find. Thanks for watching.